In this video, I'm going to share with you a case study from my client James, who went from losing at 1-3 no limit to crushing 2-5 no limit, profiting over $40 an hour in just 8 weeks. Most importantly, I'm going to share with you the key strategy we use during our consulting, which can help you do the same. Hi, my name is Alec Torelli, and I'm a professional poker player and coach. And in this video, you're going to learn how to figure out precisely what your opponents are holding using a process I invented called a hand range funnel, an easy to follow system for hand reading in poker. Keep watching.
I've been having a really hard time. I'm playing 1-2 live. I just don't know where I am in hands post-flop. I don't know what hands to play pre-flop. And I've just been going up and down. I can't seem to win. I'm looking forward to working with you. I hope we can figure these things out and turn me into a winning player.
During my time with James, we worked on a lot of things, from pre-flop fundamentals and mastering the nuances of pre-flop play, to the math, pot odds, equities, counting combos in real time, to bet sizing for both pre-flop and post-flop play. Of course, we can't cover everything in this video, but I want to focus on one core concept: hand reading, which I believe will make the biggest impact in your poker game. Keep in mind, the system I'm going to teach you is a prime example of something that takes a minute to learn, but a lifetime to master. Be patient with the process. The core strategy James used to achieve those results was my hand range funnel. I'll show you exactly how to use it in a minute, using a hand example that James sent to me. But first, I want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. In order to use the hand range funnel, you need to be familiar with the concept of a hand range. A hand range is simply all the possible hands a player can hold at any given time. For example, let's imagine your tight, solid opponent raises under the gun to $15 in a 2-5 cash game. We can assume his hand range to be the following: strong pocket pairs such as 8s or better, Broadway and connected suited cards like Jack-10 suited, Queen-Jack suited, King-Queen suited, Ace-10 suited or better, Ace-King and Ace-Queen offsuit, and maybe a few bluffs like Ace-5 or Ace-4 suited, or a mid-suited connector like 9-8 suited. It's important to keep in mind that opinions will differ when identifying an opponent's hand range. That's totally normal. However, try your best not to get caught up on that while I'm making assumptions in this video, but instead, let's focus on the process. Now I'd like to introduce you to the concept of a hand range funnel, a system I invented by distilling my own process that I use when it comes to hand reading and that I now share with clients to help them master this art. First off, I call it a hand range funnel because a funnel is the perfect visual image to help you understand how hand ranges change as the hand progresses. In short, a hand range will start very wide, such as when an opponent opens preflop, and progressively get narrower throughout the hand, just like a funnel. Hence, the hand range funnel. A hand range funnel follows 3 key principles. First, a hand range always gets narrower, and they can never get wider. This makes intuitive sense. A player cannot have a hand on the river that he cannot also have preflop. Second, a hand that's eliminated from your opponent's range is gone forever. This may sound obvious, but many people overlook this step in practice by falsely assuming their opponents can have hands which they would not have played that way on a previous street. I'll show you a common example of how people get this wrong in a minute. Third, funnels come in all shapes. There's no law that says your opponent's range must get narrower on every street, and the way they change depends on the action your opponent takes. Sometimes a hand range will get dramatically narrower, for example if your opponent check raises all in on the river. Other times they may hardly change at all, say when your opponent makes a continuation bet after the flop on an innocuous board. For a complete guide on hand range funnels, how they work, along with examples of how to implement this process during your next poker session, download my intro to hand reading at the link below or by visiting consciouspoker.com and entering your email anywhere on the site. It's absolutely free. Now that you're familiar with a hand range funnel and how it works, let's take a look at how you can use this in practice while at the table to outplay your competition during your next poker session. James sent me the following hand to discuss during one of our video conference calls. The hand took place at his local casino. Here's how it went down. With the blinds at 1-2, middle position opens to $10. The cutoff, button, and small blind call. James looks down at King 7 of spades in the big blind, and after working together to help him defend more liberally to realize his equity when getting a great price, he opts to call, closing the action. We go 5 ways to the flop. The flop comes down 7 of hearts, 3 of spades, deuce of hearts. James decides to bet out 35, both to protect his hand against draws and get value from smaller pairs or weaker sevens. It's a play I like. The logic is simple. He's going to call a bet anyway. Why risk giving a free card when his hand is so vulnerable to overcards in multi-way pots? Only the cutoff calls. And it's here where the hand range funnel comes in handy. The question you want to ask yourself in real time is, what is my opponent's hand range? Get in the habit of doing this each time your opponent takes a new action. The hand range funnel helps you determine this in an easy and accurate way. Remember, your approximation of your opponent's hand is just that, an approximation. We can't expect it to be 100% accurate, but isn't our best guess really all we have? That's poker, guys. Over time, the better you get at understanding situations, your opponents, and the nuances of the game, the better you'll become at accurately deducing ranges. Before we go any further, one question I get asked all the time is, how does this concept of identifying hand ranges apply to my games, where people seem to play any 2 cards? A common objection I hear is, I get how this can work at high stakes games that you play, but you can't even begin to understand how these players play and put them on a range. Look, I totally understand where you're coming from and realize the potential challenges of identifying hand range against loose cannons. That said, I'm confident the hand range funnel works even for those crazy players. In fact, it's against them where the process is most important, and James's opponent was one of these players. I think we can all agree, for example, that even against crazy loose players, certain hands can be eliminated from their range with relative certainty simply based on the fact that they took a specific action. For example, our opponent called a $10 raise preflop in the cutoff. Right there, we can narrow down his range quite substantially, eliminating hands on both ends of the spectrum. The fact that he didn't 3-bet means we could be almost certain he doesn't have aces or kings, and he's also unlikely to have queens, jacks, and ace-king as well. Again, it may not be 100%, it never is, but I believe in most cases it's a fair assumption. And if you're right 90% of the time, it's worth betting on, right? Second, the fact that he just called the raise means we can be equally certain he doesn't have complete garbage, like 10-4 offsuit or jack-3 offsuit. And it's important to realize that these hands account for most of the deck. In fact, even when the loosest players who call with hands they should be folding to a raise, like 9-6 suited and king-5 suited, they can still only have some 25% of hands. Look at how wide 25% of the deck actually is. That means he's calling with hands as wide as 5-3 suited and jack-10 offsuit, and even still, even against these super loose players, we can eliminate 75% of the deck simply because they called a raise preflop. The process of logically narrowing down your opponent's range is how you use the hand range funnel to your advantage, and that same process can be applied to post-flop play as well. Let's take a look. After James bet out, the cutoff called a $35 bet on a 7-3 deuce board with a flush draw. Again, we can rule out quite a few hands here on both ends of the spectrum based on the fact that he called a sizable bet with several players behind him. If he had a super premium hand, like a set, he almost certainly would have raised to protect his hand, especially with a flush draw on the board. Likewise, if he had complete garbage that didn't connect with this board, like jack-10 of diamonds, he would fold. Therefore, once again, we're only keeping the hands in his range which are in the middle of the spectrum, namely strong but not premium hands which connected with this board. Many people ask how you can implement reads or what you know about your opponent while deducing their hand range. It's actually quite simple. The fact we know our opponent to be a loose player will directly translate into the range that we put him on. In practicality, it means we can assume he'll call this flop wider than he should. Therefore, his range will not only contain any flush draw or straight draw, but any pair and even some ace-high hands. Remember when I mentioned before that a hand that's eliminated from your opponent's range is gone forever? Post-flop is where most people get this step wrong. In short, the hands we include in his flop range must also be in his pre-flop range. For example, we can rule out 7-3 suited because he wouldn't call pre-flop with that hand. We can also rule out hands like ace-4 and ace-5 offsuit for the same reason. Even though if he had those hands, he would probably call a bet with them on the flop, we can rule them out because he wouldn't call a $10 raise pre-flop with those hands. And at the risk of beating a dead horse, let's not get caught up with specifics. Maybe he will call a raise with ace-5 offsuit, and I'm wrong to assume he can't have that hand. I'm making these assumptions based on having no reads and what most players will do. If I get information to the contrary, I can adjust my hand range funnel for that player in a future hand. Let's continue. The turn comes a 9 of clubs, and James decided to lead out for 65. In reviewing this hand, I encouraged him to bet bigger here when out of position, but I agree that betting is better than checking. Not only is James still a favorite to have the best hand at this point, but he can get value from worse pairs as well as continue to charge draws. After James bet out, once again, his opponent calls. Now, let's use the hand range funnel to figure out what types of hands our opponent has. Using the same logic we applied on the flop, we can safely assume he doesn't have a big hand, like 2-pair or a set, because he would have either raised the flop or the turn with those. Therefore, we can eliminate hands like 9-7 and 9-9 from his range. I believe at this point we can also remove some of his weaker holdings, like gut shots or ace highs, as most players won't call a bet with these hands with one card left to come. Lastly, some of his weaker pairs will fold as well, like pocket 4s, 5s, and 6s. Therefore, our opponent's range at this point is comprised of the pairs he called the flop with, the flush draws, and maybe an open-ended straight draw like 5-4 suited. Visually, it will look like this. At this point, we're down to a mere 5% of the deck, meaning that we've eliminated 95% of our opponent's potential holdings. The river comes down a jack of diamonds. James now checks, hoping to win at showdown. His opponent goes all in. And here's the fun part. Before we get to the results though, I'd like you to think about what you would do here and why. Again, the question to ask yourself is simple. What is my opponent's hand range? When doing this process, my clients find it helps to break up their range into two categories, hands you beat and hands you don't. In other words, your goal is to identify which types of hands your opponent are betting for value, hands that beat you, and which hands he's bluffing with, hands that you beat. Priming yourself with these questions will help you in real time to have a better idea of where you're at in the hand. If you really want to take this to the next level, go ahead and pause the video right here and do this exercise on your own. This way, you won't be biased by the results. I'll be here when you get back. All right, are you ready for the results? Let's take a look at our opponent's range together. Before we jump in, you'll remember from the principles of hand ranges we discussed earlier that our opponent's hand range on the river must only be comprised of the hands he could have played that way on all previous streets. In other words, we're only looking at which hands from his turn calling range will now shove the river. Let's start by taking a look at the hands which beat us that are shoving for value. First, there's 2-pair, like Jack-9, but that would have to specifically be Jack-9 of hearts. For those of you who are slightly more advanced, you may be aware there's only one combination of that hand, meaning it's very unlikely. I talk more about how to use combinations in the membership at Conscious Poker, which you can learn about more at consciouspoker.com. He could also potentially have Jack-7 suited, but we'd have to go back to pre-flop to determine if that's potentially in his range. Would he really call a $10 raise preflop with Jack-7? Some players will, most won't. When unsure, I always aim to be conservative and include hands in my opponent's range that beat me. We'll include Jack-7 suited just to be safe. Our opponent may also have backdoor to straight, but only with specifically 10-8 of hearts. Remember, his other 10-8 holdings wouldn't call the flop, therefore he cannot have them on the river. If he's good at hand reading, he may also shove with some top pairs for value. But keep in mind the only hands he can have which contain a jack are once again those which called the flop and the turn. Therefore, they would have to be hands that contained hearts in them, like ace-jack, king-jack, queen-jack, or jack-10 of hearts. It's questionable whether or not he would shove the river with a mere top pair given the action, especially the weaker top pairs, as some players will simply check and hope to win at showdown. Again, when doing this exercise, we'll be conservative and assume he'll shove all of his top pairs to plan for our worst case scenario. As for value hands, that's really it. Remember, he cannot have other two pairs like 9-7 suited or any of the sets because he would have raised them on a previous street, and therefore, we've already eliminated them from his range. Now let's take a look at the bluffs. Well, he can have plenty of those. All the missed flush draws, 5-4 suited, and depending on the player, perhaps he's even turning a hand like Ace-3 suited into a bluff. To plan for my worst case scenario, let's keep his bluffs to a minimum and only include the obvious missed flush draws and straight draws. Now that we have his range figured out, what do? How do we make this decision in real time without the convenience of a calculator? Well, during our time together, I helped James implement the systems to make these decisions while playing. I walked him through how to easily add up the possibilities, known as combinations, of our opponent's bluffs and weigh them against his value hands. Once he had that information, he was then able to determine the probability that he had the best hand, or in other words, calculate his equity or chance of winning in real time. Using my combo counting worksheet, think like a multiplication table for memorizing basic combos, he was able to do this quickly while at the table. With practice, this all happens in under 30 seconds. Ultimately, James realized he was getting the right price based on his chance of winning and called, winning the hand when his opponent turned over a missed flush draw for a bluff. Remember, you won't get this right every time. That's part of the game. But what you can do is ensure you're putting money in the pot when you're likely to show a return on your investment. Over time, making winning decisions will show a long-term profit, and that's my goal for you. And that's exactly what James has done.
Alec, it's been incredible so far. I've already won 4,200 live, 1,000 online. I've moved up in stakes from 1-2 to 2-5, and I feel so much more comfortable in hands. I know where I'm at, and I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you.
This is just one example of how to use the hand range funnel in practice. If you'd like further study and implement this powerful system into your game, here are 3 ways which you can do so. The first is to head over to consciouspoker.com and subscribe to download my free Intro to Hand Reading. You'll get access to a 7-page PDF that walks you through how to use the hand range funnel in more detail. You'll also get access to a blank hand range funnel so you can do this exercise on your own following your sessions to improve your hand reading ability. Second, you can check out our membership at Conscious Poker, either by visiting the link below or visiting consciouspoker.com and clicking on products. Our membership is awesome. It's for those who want a supportive community as well as my guidance to help them reach that next level in poker. You'll get access to a database of over 100 videos on all aspects of poker strategy, mini courses on various subjects such as hand reading and mastering poker math, along with a private Facebook community where I personally respond to your questions and review your hands, along with a group coaching call led by myself where you can interact with me and other members in the community and get answers to your poker questions. Finally, for those who want to fast track their results and have me personally oversee their poker journey, you can apply to work with me at the link below or by visiting consciouspoker.com and clicking on coaching. Before you go though, be sure to leave me a comment with your thoughts and let me know if this video helped you so I can produce more content like this. Second, subscribe to my channel as that's the best way to support me in helping you on your poker journey by continuing to create useful content. Thanks for your attention, and I'll see you in the next one.